welcome. So I'm Nate Wilcox. I work on a cryptocurrency project called Zcash, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about the importance of privacy and decentralization. And I'm here with Seven. Do you want to?
Thanks, Nate. Stephen Waterhouse, also known as Seven. I work on another cryptocurrency project called Orchid, which is a decentralized VPN and platform for private decentralized services. And I'm also very excited to talk about privacy and decentralization and all sorts of other interesting things that we've been thinking about in this space.
Yeah, so I was I was thinking about this, and I feel like I mean you gave me this idea, but it's really important to talk about what we're building and where we're heading, because I think oftentimes, especially privacy fans, are kind of focused on the current problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wanted to take it in that direction, right? So how do you see where we're going with this whole cryptocurrency thing?
Right. Well, I think both of us are fairly long in the tooth on this this game. I've been working on this subject area since 2013 when I co-founded Pantera Capital, and then subsequently Orchid. And I also invest now with Fabric Ventures. So I see a lot of different projects, not just my own, that I'm running. And the thing I've noticed, especially during all of the kind of very expansive phases that we're like, such as the one that we appear to be in right now, depends on the day, of course, depending on how we feel. Is that quite often people tend to lose track of what to me are fairly deeply held beliefs, and to, I hope to many people too. And over time, I believe these deeply held beliefs are very important. And one of those beliefs for me is the concept of decentralization as a core tenet of what we build. And there are many examples of projects that have done extremely well financially by ignoring that, but over time have just sort of often faded away to somewhat irrelevance as the communities then adopt the things that are actually decentralized, actually open, composable, easy to use in different ways. So to me, it's a bit of a warning to anybody who's trying to play a bit of a longer game, which I believe is the only game you can really play, because if you try to play a short game, most people will lose, like from either time wasted, investment, etc. Longer games are really the only interesting ones to me anyway, because those are the ones that are going to make a difference, and they take longer. But yeah, I have concerns, and it's been the subject of a number of talks I've been giving recently about how we tend to historically always kind of lose track of things, and then there's this sense of, oh, don't worry because it's different this time, and it's never different this time. It's always the same kind of outcomes. We tend to invest and build lots of really silly things at the same time as building some really good things, and then the silly things die, and then everyone says, oh, this was a terrible thing, and this crypto thing's dead, and then a few years later they're like, oh my goodness, I missed out again. So it's either career wise or investment wise or whatever they're doing. So that's a sort of a broad set of things. On the privacy side and broad decentralization of privacy, I'm encouraged that your project, which I was very lucky enough to be an early investor of in Pantera, and I've been a long-time supporter of what you and Zuko and all the rest of the team are doing.
Yeah, thanks.
It's great. So it was really the first and very brave attempt to go out and build these super private networks, specifically with zero knowledge proof technology. And there's various different kinds of zero knowledge proof. You can talk even longer about this than me, but now with teams like Starkware and at Fabric, we recently invested in Mutable X, and these kind of not just privacy but also scaling technologies that combine with privacy. I'm really excited to see how that plays out. And it's going to take a while, but that's the kind of the longer game. I'm really interested in seeing projects that really take advantage of those technologies.
Yeah, that brought up so much for me. So yeah, one thing is that I feel like there's an important connection between decentralization and privacy from the perspective of adoption and usage, because these are things that most users don't notice when they're using
Mhm.
something. They only show up when bad things happen, and then
Yeah.
it's often too late. And I'm also reminded of like, uh, some things Chris Dixon has been saying about Web 2 versus Web 3. So in his story with Web 2, you had all these internet services scale up rapidly, acquire users, and there's this new paradigm where the users were bringing the content to the platform, and suddenly that could bring in so much more content and value. But over time, once they sort of reach a saturation point, these centralized networks need some way to monetize that. And how do they do that? Well, they take advantage of the users in various ways. And the way they've done that has not been obvious immediately to users who are like using the products in the moment, but it's become really obvious when we're seeing fallout. So I do think privacy is it's sort of like, I mean, I don't want to. I used to say vaccines all the time, but that was before COVID. It's kind of like
Right.
maybe vaccines or pollution or something. It's like you're driving your smoggy car in the 70s,
Mhm.
you don't see the pollution, but then at the end of the day, everyone can see the smog over the city and knows it's a problem. And I feel like both decentralization and privacy are like that. You can use the app, you don't notice the issue, but then we have like, identity theft and all these issues with these platforms. Another piece you brought up for me is this connection between privacy and scalability. This one is one I'm really excited about. I think there's a fundamental connection actually between scalability and privacy, because when you think about it, if you want scalability, you want a system where ideally only the people interacting need to share information. That would be the most extreme ideal. And then that's very scalable. It could scale to billions of users who are each interacting
Yeah.
with smaller groups of each other. And that's exactly what you want for privacy too. You want, if I'm interacting with a group of people, our interaction is shared among us. We can, choose to disclose stuff about that later. But we want by default that interaction to be private, or I
That's a
do.
good point. I
Yeah.
like that. I think as you were talking, it made me think of something fairly recent. So I'm based in Europe now. I live in Lisbon. Spent 23 years in San Francisco, and in San Francisco and sort of like in the US, there's very much this concept, even though it's not always implemented in some of the regulations we see or might come down, or even the implementation of them. But there's a sense that you have a right to be private. Now, in Europe, we've got GDPR and we've got this sort of like regulation, like we're going to be private. But meanwhile, the European vaccine passport, which has been incredibly helpful, having got one and being able to scan it and all these kind of things, was really the end result of what ended up being kind of this KYC AML, this know your customer kind of style of interaction, to the point where when I was in Berlin earlier this year, I was having to fill in forms to go shopping. It was kind of like, okay, I've got to fill in this form. I've already taken a COVID test, and now I've got to kind of KYC to go buy some clothes. And your choices were either to do these things or opt out of society. You want to take your girlfriend out on a date, or sorry, you've got a KYC. That's just your choice. And this is really an example of how, when not just with government's regulation, but also with applications, when something new comes along, we quite quickly just say, well, this isn't that big a deal. I'll just, get some information out. And it was so ironic to me that, companies like ourselves and these projects that we're building and the kind of work and the talks we give, we're telling people how to protect themselves online and all these things. And meanwhile, millions and millions of people are just like filling in forms and saying, and right now, international travel is very much like that. Not only the airline knows who you are, but everybody else knows who you are. The health services know who you are. And yes, it's for the greater good. I get that. Contact tracing and trying to get rid of this virus is important. I've lost friends to this stuff. So I believe in the concept, but at the same time, it's an example of how quickly we just let go of this idea of, well, it doesn't really matter. What do I have to hide? Kind of these kind of usual concepts. So I think that is emblematic of everything that happens when new applications come on, or new situations and new crises come along. We quite quickly forget that. Um, I think one point which is we talked about yesterday was the idea of the kind of this. There's a couple of ideas here. One is this increasing surveillance of what I would I try to use the word blockchain almost as an insult now. It's kind of this like governments talk about blockchains and they talk about these central bank digital currencies, and I really try to avoid using the word blockchain unless I'm specifically talking about a blockchain. And crypto, even though it means so many things and is somewhat overloaded, is sort of my favorite term nowadays. Even though it can mean other things, cryptography and so on. The thing that I'm very concerned about is that by letting go of decentralization, specifically in the concept of central bank digital currencies, and we see this in what China is building, and we see this in proposals in the United States and other places of whether they're proposals or whether things are being proposed to put in the infrastructure bill or other regulations that are coming out, is this idea that, as and I interviewed Ed Snowden at the last Private conference, the conference we do at Orchid, and this idea of just like kind of trawling all information and now all transactions so that we can catch the bad people. It's almost like this experiment that society is trying to run, is to say, which one do we want? Do we actually want privacy, or do we want to troll everything that anyone's ever done, never will do, in the hopes that we will catch all the bad people? How do you think about that? Like, this is a very like fiery kind of question, but how do you think about that when you think about what you're doing?
Yeah. So yeah, first I want to acknowledge where those impulses are coming from, right? So like you mentioned contact tracing, that's obviously helpful kind of as an expedient. Or if we're thinking about central bank digital currencies, there is an impetus to fight crime, right? And so I understand where that's coming from, but I don't think it pays off on the net, especially in the long term, for two big reasons. So one is somebody's holding the keys. They're gathering all the information. They have this special power on whatever the platform is. So they're obviously a juicy target, right? They can be co-opted, they can be hacked. Like I'm remembering the hack of the US, what is it, the office, is it OMB? It's like the department responsible for hiring all federal employees, including in intelligence and all over the place. They got hacked and all of their records were exfiltrated. This is like 2015 or something. So it's like, once you gather these honeypots, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. So that's one problem. And that's even assuming like the people with the honeypot have the best of intentions. They can still get attacked. The second problem I think is bigger in a way, and it's going to become more and more important. And it especially applies to cryptocurrency, which is if you have like the centralized control, well, who's going to control that? Whoever has the authority or power in these different jurisdictions. And then what does that lead to? It leads to reifying sort of this balkanization of the internet. And for me, crypto, the promise is enabling better cooperation with people all over the world. And we see like examples of that happening all the time in crypto. Like the latest that comes to mind for me is people making money in the Philippines playing Axie Infinity. Maybe that's good or bad in different ways, but the fact is they're able to have this opportunity to make a new kind of income. And it's only possible because crypto is global.
Yeah.
If crypto were balkanized and there was like the Philippines walled garden and the North Atlantic walled garden or whatever, where would Axie actually live? How would people use it?
Yeah, and we see this already in China with the Chinese internet being completely cut off from the rest of the world, and we can't
Hmm.
interact with it in many ways, or there's large applications. And they make sense when they're localized applications. But as you're saying, crypto has this promise of being a global thing, like money, and information. I think we both believe should be globally easy to move around and share with one another. Um, yeah, I think it's challenging, right? The people often ask me, where are these regulations coming from? Where is this encroaching into privacy coming from? And I ultimately think that it's a very simple thing, which is that if we're building decentralized systems, which ultimately have decentralized governance, people who are in the business of governance don't like being told that they're going to get decentralized. It's like, well, that's my job. I've been spending my whole life governing people, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm the best person for it. You're telling me we're going to do this with a whole bunch of weird voting structures that somehow are going to work out? Okay, that'll never work. It's chaos. That sounds like anarchy. So I think there's a kind of like, there's a simple way of looking at, and obviously that applies to different kinds of things. Um, it's certainly going to be a very interesting few years. Are you hopeful in general for the future of privacy and decentralization? Like, how do you think about it? You started me off with
Oh
that
yeah,
question. What do you think is going on?
yeah. I'm definitely hopeful, because I think the cat's out of the bag. Like,
Hmm.
there's no stopping. Um, there's no stopping it because people see, like everyday people, not policymakers necessarily, but more and more people are using crypto, and they get it when they use it. Um, and more applications or use cases are becoming available, right? So um, again, the Axie Infinity example is just the
Mm-hmm.
latest example of like a couple of weeks ago. And I think the pace of those is going to increase. So like in the cryptocurrency uh, bubble that I follow on Twitter, lots of people are focused on like disrupting finance.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally think that's a big part of it. But there's so many more things happening, right? There's NFTs, there's DAOs, there are all these efforts at decentralized identity, which
Yeah.
can is quite a challenge. But the fact is, there's so many different efforts banging on so many different fronts. It's just going to spill out. And so for me,
Mm-hmm.
the main question is, how does it integrate into society? What does society look like? Because I actually believe certain kinds of coordination that is currently done by governments or policymakers may be more effective and achievable through some of these crypto systems in the future, whereas
Mm-hmm.
other things are less amenable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like policing burglars
Yeah.
on your street. Maybe that's going to be still in meat space. So I think in 10 or 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to see kind of more of this fabric uh,
Mm-hmm.
of users and marketplaces and sort of crypto governance structures getting tied in to um, existing governance structures. So
That sounds exciting.
yeah, it's exciting. There's plenty
Mm-hmm.
of, as with any sort of like Wild West frontier, there's plenty of room for disasters. But I think overall, um, other projects will continue carrying on where certain experiments fail.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. Makes me feel better.
Yeah.
At times we live in a somewhat of a dystopian conversation, but yeah, I would agree. And I think that to that point, the really interesting part of these technology waves, whether it was the things we've been involved in the beginning of the web, and then mobile and the social networks and things that we've seen that initially don't seem to be changing society, and all of a sudden brand new behaviors emerge, and
Hmm.
the way that people communicate, the way people date, the way people like get jobs, and how people work, and we're seeing the beginnings of that in the world we live in the crypto world. But it's going to be fascinating when it moves out, and I'm sure we both hope that will also uh, be both decentralized and private.
Hmm.
So I think we're near the end of our time now, but
Yeah.
I really enjoyed catching up with you again, Nate, and look forward to our next conversation, maybe in meat space. Um,
Yeah.
okay.
That that would be nice.